The Galactic Science Fair was the biggest event of the year, a grand showcase of incredible inventions, brilliant minds, and advanced technologies from all over the universe. Each year, species from hundreds of planets gathered to celebrate science and innovation. It was an opportunity for the brightest young scientists to make their mark. The event was held on the planet Zovara, the home of the Zorvan fleet, the most powerful military force in the galaxy. The Zorvans were known for their brilliant engineers, skilled pilots, and advanced warships that could destroy entire fleets in a matter of minutes. This year, however, something was different. For the first time, Earth, a small and seemingly unimportant planet in a far corner of the galaxy, had been invited to participate. Earth had only recently joined the Galactic Assembly, and many species still saw humans as an inexperienced species, barely capable of building anything more complicated than a car or a basic satellite. The humans were excited, but they were nervous too. There were only a few humans at the fair, and one of them was 12-year-old Ellie Carter, a girl who spent most of her time designing strange spaceships in her notebook. Ellie wasn't like the other young scientists at the fair. She wasn't there to impress anyone or to make a name for herself. She was simply curious. Curiosity was her only drive, and her designs were often wild and untested. The other species laughed at Earth's participation, assuming the humans would present nothing more than a pile of outdated, slow, and useless technology. Ellie didn't mind. She was used to being underestimated. As she stood in the corner of the large hall, the hum of alien voices around her, she fiddled with her notebook, sketching out designs for a spaceship that she thought could go faster than any ship in the galaxy. To everyone else, it probably looked like a doodle, just a few lines and circles. But to Ellie, it made perfect sense. The other children were busy with their advanced projects, ships that looked like living creatures, robots that could solve the mysteries of the universe, and engines that could harness the energy of stars. When Ellie's turn came to present her design, she stepped forward hesitantly. She had no flashy project or complicated machine to show off. All she had was her drawing. With a soft voice, Ellie introduced herself to the panel of judges, 3 of the most intelligent beings in the galaxy. There was Zarnak, the tall, green-skinned scientist from the planet Orcs, whose people could manipulate time. Vela, a wise and quiet Italian from the distant planet Malto, who had a natural ability to communicate with machines, and Yuzul, a Zorvan engineer with a reputation for being harsh and critical, yet undeniably brilliant. Zarnak raised an eyebrow as Ellie unrolled her drawing. It looked like a simple spaceship, nothing extraordinary. The judges exchanged glances, barely hiding their amusement. Ellie didn't notice. She was already explaining the concept behind her design. "This is the Starbound," she said, pointing to the sketch. "It's a ship that can travel faster than anything we've ever seen before. It uses an engine I call the Ellie Drive. It's based on the idea that speed doesn't just come from power, it comes from balance." She paused, unsure if the judges were even listening. Yuxel, the Zorvan, leaned forward with a sneer. "Balance," he repeated in a deep, skeptical voice. "You think a simple balance will make your ship faster than anything in the galaxy?" Ellie nodded earnestly. "Yes, it's not about brute force. It's about creating a system where everything works together, where the energy flows without resistance." She gestured at the design, showing a complex arrangement of energy chambers and tiny wings that could shift position in response to the ship's speed. If it works, the ship will move like a streak of light, faster than anything else. The judges looked at each other. They were already preparing their polite but dismissive comments. A child from Earth, thinking she could design a ship faster than the Zorvans. It was laughable. Yet, despite their doubts, something about Ellie's enthusiasm caught their attention. Zarnak, who had witnessed countless inventions from across the galaxy, sensed something in the design that intrigued him. "You want us to test it?" Zarnak asked, more out of curiosity than belief. Ellie smiled. "Sure. but I don't think you'll need to test it to see how fast it is. Just trust me." The judges were hesitant, but they agreed to run a simulation. They assumed it would prove that Ellie's design was nothing more than a fantasy. Still, they felt a strange obligation to at least humor the Earthling. They sent the plans to the simulation system, not expecting much. But as soon as the simulation started, the results shocked everyone in the room. The Starbound, though only a digital copy, blasted through the test parameters at incredible speeds. It outpaced anything the judges had ever seen. The computer declared that the ship could, theoretically, travel faster than the speed of light, something thought impossible by every other species. Ellie's eyes widened as the simulation results appeared on the screen. "I knew it," she whispered under her breath. The room went silent. The other children in the fair turned to watch, their laughter gone. The Zorvans, proud of their advanced technology, couldn't hide their surprise. Earth had just done something that no one had thought possible. And it had all started with a child's simple, curious idea. The results of the simulation spread like wildfire across the galactic science fair. News from the event traveled quickly, passing through communication channels, gossiping halls, and across star systems. The once laughable Earth had now become the center of attention. All eyes turned toward young Ellie Carter, whose simple doodle had just redefined what was possible in space travel. Ellie herself barely understood the magnitude of what she had done. She was still sitting in the corner of the hall, half hidden behind a stack of glowing alien engineering books, quietly munching on a bag of pretzels. She had never intended for her design to be anything more than an idea, something that felt right to her. But now her ship, the Starbound, was a topic of conversation throughout the galaxy. Zarnak, the tall green-skinned Orcian scientist, was the first to approach Ellie after the shocking simulation results. His broad, angular face was lined with curiosity, though his voice still carried the calm, collected tone of someone who had seen it all. "Ellie Carter," he began, his deep voice reverberating through the hall. "You've just shown us something incredible. That ship you designed, there's potential there. Not just potential, it's revolutionary. We would like to study it more." Ellie looked up from her pretzels and blinked in surprise. Sure, but I didn't mean to." She started to explain. Zarnak interrupted with a smile. "It's not about intention. It's about the result. This design of yours, it could change everything." Ellie fidgeted, not quite understanding why the scientist was so excited. To her, it was just a simple idea, something that seemed to make sense at the time. It was all about balancing forces, she thought. But clearly, the rest of the galaxy saw it as something far more important. Soon, other members of the Galactic Assembly began to gather around Ellie. Vela, the calm and wise Italian, approached with an air of gentle authority. She was always quiet, but her eyes could read the deepest mysteries of technology. "Ellie, your ship is an anomaly," Vela said softly. "The way it defies known physics. It's unlike anything we've ever seen. What's your theory on how it works?" Ellie scratched her head. She was good at imagining how things worked, but she wasn't always the best at explaining it. She didn't know much about complicated space mechanics or complex equations. She just liked to draw what felt right. "It's like a shortcut," Ellie said, her voice unsure, but her words bubbling with excitement. "The ship doesn't just fly, it moves in waves, like when you skip a stone on water. It just flows faster when you don't try to force it. So, I figured, if I made the engine like that, the ship could move without resistance." The group fell silent for a moment. Then, Vela spoke, her voice filled with wonder. "Faster without resistance. The energy needed for such speed would be immense. But your design, it's more than just a ship. It's a new way of thinking about travel. Perhaps even a new kind of physics." Ellie just smiled, her thoughts already shifting to the next thing she wanted to design. But the room wasn't finished with her yet. Ugsel, the stern and serious Zorvan engineer, had been watching quietly from the back. He had a reputation for being critical, but also for knowing the most about how ships worked. Finally, Luxol stepped forward. His heavy steps echoed across the hall. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with a face marked by years of intense study and battle. His eyes were sharp, always calculating. "This design," he began, his voice low but direct. "It's impossible. Nothing should be able to travel this fast without falling apart. But I want to see if it's true. If it works, it will change the way we fight wars, travel between stars, even live our lives. I don't know whether to praise you or warn you, but I want to see your ship in action." Ellie's heart skipped a beat. She wasn't thinking about warships or galactic politics. She was just excited by the idea of her ship moving at unimaginable speeds. But she understood that this technology could have bigger consequences than she had realized. "We'll build it," Yugzol continued, his tone firm. "Not just a model, but a real ship. And we'll test it." Ellie looked up at him, her eyes wide. "You'll really build it?" Zarnak nodded. "We're serious. But you'll be with us every step of the way. We need to understand this, Ellie. Your design could take us further than we've ever gone before." Ellie wasn't sure whether to feel excited or nervous. She was just a kid with a notebook and a lot of crazy ideas. But now, her design was about to become reality. She would be part of something bigger than herself. As the meeting wrapped up, Ellie walked out of the hall, her head full of thoughts. The other children at the fair were still whispering about her. Some were amazed, some were jealous, but all of them were interested. Ellie didn't mind. She wasn't there for their approval. She wasn't there to compete with the galaxy's brightest minds. She was just there to make things work. And if that meant designing the fastest ship ever built, then so be it. For now, she had one goal: to see her ship take flight. The Starbound wasn't just a drawing anymore. It was about to change the galaxy forever. The excitement surrounding Ellie's design didn't fade with the passing days. Instead, it grew. The Starbound, her spaceship, a simple yet revolutionary idea, was no longer just a sketch on paper. It was being built. Experts from every corner of the galaxy, all eager to understand her idea, were working together to bring her dream to life. Ellie couldn't quite believe it. Every day, she would go to the construction site, where the ship was taking shape in a massive hangar. She still didn't fully understand the technical aspects of what they were doing, but she was fascinated by it all. Engineers from various species, each with their own unique skills, were busy putting her design into action. There were Zorvans handling the structural integrity of the ship, Italians ensuring the energy systems were compatible, and even a few Orcsians working on optimizing the time calculations for faster-than-light travel. Ellie wandered around the hangar, her eyes wide as she observed the chaos of machinery. Every now and then, she would stop and point to a part of the ship and suggest an idea, something that she thought might improve the flow or balance of the design. To her surprise, many of the engineers listened and actually incorporated her suggestions. Some laughed at her childish enthusiasm, but others saw the spark of genius in her ideas. One day, Ellie found herself in front of the ship's cockpit, which had just been installed. It was sleek and shiny, with controls that looked more like futuristic art than anything functional. It seemed impossible that something so elegant could hold such power. "Ellie, come here," shouted Uxel, the Zorvan engineer, waving her over. He had been working on the outer shell of the ship for hours, and his face was covered in a mixture of sweat and grease. He was serious, but there was something in his eyes, something he couldn't hide. "We need you to test the main system controls. We finished everything, and the ship is ready for a test flight." Ellie's heart skipped a beat. She had never imagined she would be the one to test the Starbound. She was just a child. But there she was, standing before the cockpit of the most advanced ship in the galaxy. She could see the excitement in the faces of the engineers, who were eager to watch her take control of the ship that had once been only a drawing in her notebook. With a deep breath, Ellie climbed into the cockpit. It was surprisingly comfortable, and the view through the glass was breathtaking. The stars twinkled brightly outside, and the entire galaxy seemed to stretch out before her. She smiled and took a seat, adjusting the controls in front of her. They were more complicated than anything she had ever seen, but there was something about the way the buttons and levers seemed to respond to her touch. It felt right. The engineers gathered around her, watching closely as Ellie prepared to engage the ship's systems. They had already run preliminary tests with the ship's engines, but this was the real test. If the Starbound could perform as Ellie had predicted, it would change everything. "Remember, Ellie," Uxel said, his voice firm. "This is only a test. Don't push the ship too hard. We don't know if the engine can handle the pressure." Ellie nodded, but she was already thinking ahead. She had designed this ship to be faster, smoother, and more efficient than anything else. She wasn't afraid. She knew it was going to work. With a flick of her wrist, she activated the engine. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, with a soft hum, the Starbound came to life. The entire ship vibrated gently, as if it were waking up from a long slumber. "Steady," she whispered to herself. She pushed the throttle slightly, just enough to feel the ship's power building beneath her. The engineers were holding their breath, watching as the ship slowly lifted off the ground. They had never seen a ship this smooth, this precise. The Starbound hovered in place, gently rising a few meters off the ground, and Ellie looked out the window. The hangar was a tiny dot below her, and she felt an overwhelming sense of freedom. It was like the ship was an extension of herself. "Okay," she said, her voice filled with excitement. "Let's see how fast you can really go." With a confident push of a button, Ellie engaged the drive. At first, there was a slight hesitation. The ship seemed to sense her intent before it shot forward, faster than anything Ellie had ever felt. The stars outside blurred, streaking into lines of light as the ship accelerated. Ellie grinned, feeling a rush of exhilaration. She had designed this ship to break barriers, to reach speeds that no one else could imagine. And here it was, doing just that. But then something unexpected happened. The ship didn't stop accelerating. It wasn't just fast, it was beyond fast. The ship tore through the atmosphere, its engines glowing brighter and brighter as it pushed past the speed of light. Ellie could barely comprehend what was happening, but she didn't need to. She could feel the ship responding to her every thought, moving in perfect harmony with her. The engineers watching from below were speechless. They had never seen anything like this. The Starbound wasn't just a success. It was a new chapter in the history of space travel. Ellie, her heart racing with excitement, had only one thought in her mind as the ship continued to soar through the stars. This is just the beginning. The news of Ellie's successful test flight spread quickly across the galaxy. Everyone was talking about it. The Starbound, a ship designed by a human child, had not only flown, it had broken the boundaries of space travel. The engineers who had worked on the ship with Ellie were still in awe of what they had just witnessed. Even Uxel, who had been the most skeptical of them all, was speechless. Ellie, however, felt something different. She wasn't sure what had just happened. The speed, the way the ship moved, it all felt right. It was like the Starbound wasn't just a machine. It was a living thing, responding to her thoughts, following her every command. She had always imagined the ship in her mind, but now she could feel it in her bones. The next few days were filled with meetings, interviews, and endless discussions with engineers, scientists, and leaders from across the galaxy. Everyone wanted to understand how Ellie's design had worked, how she had created something so powerful, so fast, from nothing more than a few sketches and a wild idea. But despite all the attention, Ellie stayed mostly quiet. She wasn't interested in fame or recognition. She just wanted to know how far the Starbound could go. Ellie was sitting in the Galactic Control Center, watching as the engineers made final adjustments to the ship. They had already confirmed that the ship's speed was unlike anything anyone had ever seen. Now it was time for the next phase, testing its ability to travel long distances across vast stretches of space faster than light. Ellie leaned back in her chair, watching the engineers work. She felt a sense of pride, but also a deep curiosity. How would the Starbound perform on a longer journey? Could it truly change the way the galaxy traveled, the way entire fleets moved? The main engineer in charge of the project, Vela, stepped forward, her calm, thoughtful expression never changing. Vela had been fascinated by Ellie's design from the beginning, but now she was focused on something much bigger. "We've been testing the ship's systems for days now," Vela said, turning to Ellie. "We're ready for the next test. Are you prepared for a longer journey? The Starbound can handle the speed, but we need to see how it performs when traveling for an extended period." Ellie smiled, a small, confident grin. "I'm ready. Let's see how far it can go." The engineers nodded, and a team of skilled pilots and navigators began preparing the ship for the long journey ahead. Ellie watched as the team activated the main engines, slowly preparing the Starbound for its biggest test yet. The galaxy outside the control center was filled with stars, some distant, some near. The potential for the Starbound to reach all of them, faster than anyone had ever imagined, was an exciting thought. The ship was now ready. Ellie climbed into the cockpit once again, feeling that familiar excitement rise within her. This wasn't just about proving herself anymore. It was about proving what humanity was capable of. It was about showing the galaxy that humans, despite being new to the scene, had something special to offer. "Here we go," Ellie said, her voice steady as she activated the engines. With a hum, the Starbound slowly lifted off the ground. The air around the ship began to shimmer as the engine kicked into full power. Ellie's hands tightened on the controls, but she wasn't afraid. She knew this ship. She understood it in a way no one else did. And then, just like that, the ship was gone. One moment, Ellie was staring at the control center below, and the next, she was light years away, surrounded by the vast emptiness of space. The Starbound moved so quickly that it was hard for Ellie to even track where she was. The stars outside blurred into long streaks of light, disappearing into the distance. Ellie grinned, exhilarated. She was in the middle of space, flying faster than anyone had ever dreamed possible. She felt the ship's power as it soared through the galaxies, taking her to places no human had ever been. Every turn, every shift in direction, was smooth, as though the ship was made for this very purpose. It wasn't just a machine. It was an extension of her thoughts, a reflection of her imagination. Back at the control center, the engineers were watching in awe. They had never seen anything like it. The Starbound was now traveling faster than any other ship in existence, and it was holding steady, without any signs of strain or resistance. The ship's systems were running perfectly. It was as though it was born to do this. But as the minutes passed, something unexpected happened. The engineers began to notice small fluctuations in the ship's energy readings. It wasn't anything dangerous, but it was unusual. The ship was still moving at incredible speeds, but there was something about the way the energy was being used, something they couldn't fully explain. Vela turned to Yuxel, who was watching the data with a furrowed brow. "There's something strange happening," she said quietly. "The ship isn't just moving faster than light. It's creating its own path, its own route. It's not following the usual laws of space-time. It's almost like the ship is bending them." Yuxel nodded, still staring at the readings. "This is beyond anything I've ever seen." Back on the Starbound, Ellie didn't notice the small fluctuations. To her, the ship was perfect. She was flying through the stars, the universe opening up before her like a beautiful, infinite sea. As the ship continued its journey, one thing was certain. The Starbound was more than just a ship. It was a breakthrough, a window into a new era of space travel. And Ellie, the young girl with a notebook full of sketches, had created it. As Ellie and the Starbound continued their journey through the stars, the engineers back at the control center monitored the ship's progress with growing fascination. At first, they had thought the Starbound was just a fast ship, capable of speeds never before seen. But now they realized that it was doing something far beyond simple speed. The ship seemed to be doing something no ship should be able to do. It was altering the very fabric of space around it. Ellie, however, didn't notice anything unusual. She was focused on the thrill of flying at faster-than-light speeds, her mind racing with excitement. She had always dreamed of space, but this was far beyond her wildest dreams. She had created something incredible, and now she was living it. The stars outside were a blur as she soared across the galaxy, the hum of the engines a steady companion to her thoughts. As she looked out through the Starbound's cockpit window, Ellie noticed something strange. For the first time since the ship had taken off, the stars seemed to be shifting, moving in ways they shouldn't. She frowned, puzzled. The stars weren't supposed to change positions like this, but the Starbound was moving faster than light, so perhaps this was just another effect of the ship's speed. She brushed it off, focused on the task at hand. There was no time for doubt. Back at the control center, Vela and Uxel were studying the data, their expressions growing more and more concerned. They had been monitoring Ellie's ship closely, but now the readings were growing increasingly strange. The Starbound wasn't just traveling through space, it was bending it. The ship seemed to be distorting the very fabric of the universe, creating its own path through space-time. "This isn't just speed," Uxel said, his voice filled with awe. "This ship, it's altering the laws of physics. It's creating a new reality around it." Vela nodded slowly, her face serious. "This is beyond what we thought was possible. The Starbound is rewriting everything we know about space travel." The engineers continued to study the readings, trying to understand what was happening. They had no idea what would happen next. They had created something powerful, but it was becoming clear that they had no idea how to control it. Ellie, meanwhile, had been flying for hours, completely unaware of the changes happening around her. But as she continued her journey, the feeling of unease grew. Something was wrong. The stars were no longer just a blur outside her window. They were beginning to twist, to bend in ways that felt unnatural. She leaned forward in her seat, her hands trembling on the controls. "What's happening?" she whispered to herself. And then the Starbound did something that Ellie hadn't expected. The ship suddenly veered off course, shifting its path in a way that seemed completely impossible. The stars outside the window twisted and warped, and Ellie's heart raced as she tried to regain control of the ship. Come on," she muttered, pushing the controls harder. But the ship wasn't listening. It seemed to have a mind of its own now, its path spiraling out of control. Back at the control center, the engineers were scrambling to make sense of what was happening. The ship's course had shifted without warning, and they couldn't explain why. The Starbound was moving in a way that no ship should be able to. Faster, farther, and more unpredictably than any technology had ever allowed. "It's pulling away from the systems," Vela said, staring at the data in disbelief. It's creating its own reality. I don't know how to stop it." The communication screens flickered, and Ellie's voice came through, a little shaky but strong. "Something's wrong. I can't control the ship. It's like it's..." Her voice cut off as a bright light filled the cockpit. The stars outside exploded into swirling colors, bending in ways that no one had ever seen before. The ship was no longer in regular space. It had entered something else entirely. Ellie had no idea what was happening, but she knew it wasn't just a test anymore. The Starbound was no longer following the rules of the galaxy. For a few moments, the ship was surrounded by nothing but light and color. The stars outside twisted and turned, their shapes becoming unrecognizable. Ellie's hands shook as she tried to understand what she was seeing. She wasn't flying through the galaxy anymore. She was somewhere else, somewhere beyond the stars. "What is this?" she asked, her voice trembling. "Where am I?" Back at the control center, the engineers watched in horror. They had lost contact with Ellie. The Starbound had disappeared into a new kind of space, something beyond their comprehension. They couldn't reach her, couldn't understand what had happened. But then, after what seemed like an eternity, the stars outside the starbound's window began to shift again. The colors faded, and the ship started to slow down. Slowly, the familiar stars of the galaxy reappeared. Ellie let out a breath she didn't realize she had been holding. She was still flying, still in control of the starbound. But something had changed. She had crossed into a place no one had ever seen before. She didn't know how she had done it, or what had just happened. But she knew one thing for certain. The starbound had just taken her to a place beyond the galaxy, and she had no idea where that place was. "Where am I now?" she whispered, staring out the window at the unknown stars. The engineers were just beginning to process what had happened. They had no answers. But one thing was clear. The starbound had just opened a door to something unimaginable. Ellie had taken the first step into a new frontier, a frontier that no one, not even the brightest minds of the galaxy, could have predicted. Ellie stared out the cockpit window of the starbound, trying to make sense of the strange, unfamiliar space around her. The stars no longer looked like the bright, familiar points of light she had always seen. They were stretched out into lines, swirling and twisting in ways that felt like something out of a dream. It wasn't just space, it was something else entirely. Something new. The ship had drifted through this strange, uncharted region for what felt like hours. The hum of the starbound's engines was a comforting sound, a reminder that she was still in control, at least for now. But her heart was racing. She had never imagined something like this could happen. She had created the fastest ship in the galaxy, but now it seemed that the starbound had gone far beyond what anyone had ever planned for. She reached for the control panel, her fingers hovering over the buttons. She didn't know what to do. She had never learned how to navigate this kind of space. The stars outside were so different, so alien, and Ellie had no idea where they were or how she had ended up here. But the ship was still flying, and she still had the controls. That was something. "Where am I?" she whispered to herself, her voice barely audible over the hum of the ship. "How do I get back?" But the ship didn't answer. It was silent, as if it too were waiting for something to happen. Back on the control center, Vela and the rest of the engineering team were still trying to make sense of what had happened. The data they were receiving was unlike anything they had ever seen before. The starbound had entered a space that didn't follow the normal laws of physics. The readings were erratic, shifting in ways that were impossible to predict. Ellie had crossed into a region of space that no one knew anything about. It was a place beyond the known galaxy, a place that seemed to exist outside of time and space. "We've lost contact with Ellie," Vela said, her voice tense as she watched the screen. "The ship is in some sort of anomaly. I've never seen anything like this. We need to get her back," Uxel said, his voice urgent. "We don't know what this is. If she stays there too long, we could lose her." But Vela was already shaking her head. "There's nothing we can do. We can't send a ship in there. It would never survive. Whatever's happening to the starbound, it's beyond anything we've ever encountered. We don't even know if it's possible for her to return." Ellie, meanwhile, was still in the cockpit, staring at the twisting stars. She had been flying through this strange space for what felt like an eternity, but she wasn't sure how long it had really been. Time seemed to move differently here, as if the normal rules of the universe didn't apply. Suddenly, the stars outside the window began to shift again. Ellie's breath caught in her throat as she watched the lines of light twist and bend, as if the fabric of space itself was stretching. The ship was moving through something that didn't feel like the galaxy she had known. "Come on," she muttered, her fingers tightening on the controls. "Come on, starbound. You can do this." Without warning, the ship lurched forward. The stars outside shifted again, but this time, Ellie could see something new. A vast expanse, unlike anything she had ever seen before. There were no stars, no galaxies, just endless blackness, filled with swirling, glowing shapes. It was as if the universe itself had turned into a swirling, chaotic storm of color and light. Ellie gasped, her heart racing. She had never seen anything like this. It was beautiful, but terrifying at the same time. The ship was no longer just flying. It was moving through something beyond her understanding. She pulled back on the controls, trying to slow the ship down, but it didn't respond. The Starbound was moving faster, as if it had a mind of its own. Ellie felt a jolt of panic as the ship shot forward, its engines roaring to life. She had no idea where it was going or why it was moving so quickly, but she couldn't stop it. Back on the control center, the engineers were watching in horror. The ship was moving through the anomaly at an incredible speed, and the data they were receiving was becoming more and more erratic. They had no way of knowing where the Starbound was or how it was navigating this strange space. "Vela, we have to do something," Uxel said, his voice tight with fear. "Ellie's in danger. We can't just let her go." Vela stood in silence for a long moment, her face pale. Then she turned to the communications officer. "Send out a signal. We need to try to reach Ellie. Maybe we can give her a way to find her way back." But as they tried to send the signal, something strange happened. The communication system flickered, then went silent. The signal couldn't get through. Ellie, meanwhile, was still flying through the unknown. The Starbound was racing faster than she had ever imagined. The swirling lights outside the ship were no longer just beautiful. They were now dangerous. They were closing in, faster than she could comprehend. Ellie's hands gripped the controls with a mix of fear and determination. She couldn't let the ship crash. She couldn't lose control. She had to get back. Suddenly, the Starbound lurched to a stop. Ellie's heart skipped a beat as the ship came to an abrupt halt. The stars outside were gone, replaced by darkness. The ship was no longer moving. For the first time since she had entered this strange space, Ellie felt a sense of stillness. "Where am I?" she whispered, her voice filled with both fear and awe. The Starbound had brought her to a place beyond the galaxy, beyond the stars. It had taken her somewhere new, somewhere no one had ever been. And Ellie had no idea how to get back. Ellie sat in the cockpit of the Starbound, staring out at the vast emptiness surrounding her. The stars were gone, replaced by an endless void. The ship had come to a complete stop, and the hum of the engines had fallen silent. It felt as if the universe itself had paused, holding its breath. Ellie's heart raced, and her hands gripped the controls, though she knew they were powerless now. She was alone in a place no one had ever seen before, and she had no idea how to return home. The strange, swirling lights that had once filled her view had disappeared. Everything around her was dark and still. For a moment, Ellie thought she might be stuck here forever, lost in an unknown space, unable to find her way back to the galaxy she knew. But then she felt something. A strange, quiet pull, like the ship was gently being tugged in a direction she couldn't explain. Her eyes widened as she looked at the controls. The ship had started moving again, but this time, it wasn't following any path she had set. It was as if the Starbound knew where it was going, like it had a purpose that Ellie couldn't understand. She watched, captivated, as the stars slowly began to reappear in the distance, their familiar shapes lighting up the darkness. The pull grew stronger, and before she knew it, Ellie was no longer just moving through empty space. She was headed back to where she had come from. But how? The ship had traveled so far, across strange and uncharted spaces. How was it possible that it could find its way back? In the control center, Vela and the team watched the data coming through with bated breath. The Starbound was moving again, but this time, there was no sign of the anomaly that had swallowed it before. The stars were returning to their normal positions. Ellie's ship seemed to be on some kind of path, but they still couldn't understand what was happening. They had no way of contacting Ellie, but something was happening. The Starbound was traveling faster than anything they had ever seen, and the stars were beginning to shift back to their familiar places in the galaxy. Back in the cockpit, Ellie was starting to feel a sense of calm. The pull had become almost comforting, like the Starbound was guiding her back home. The dark space around her began to give way to light, and soon the swirling stars that had seemed so strange now felt like old friends, welcoming her back. But there was something else, something she hadn't expected. The ship was moving with such speed that Ellie couldn't keep track of the stars. They were becoming streaks of light, bending and curving around her like they were being sucked into the path the Starbound was creating. It was as if the ship was tearing through space itself, creating a new route, a new reality. Ellie's heart pounded as the Starbound accelerated, the stars outside transforming into glowing streaks of color. She couldn't explain it, but it felt as though the ship was doing something beyond speed. It was as if the Starbound was rewriting the very rules of space to get back to where it belonged. The faster it moved, the more everything around her seemed to bend and shift. The galaxies, the stars, the very fabric of the universe, it was all responding to the ship's incredible power. Then, just as quickly as it had started, the ship slowed. The stars began to settle, and the strange, otherworldly space faded away. Ellie looked out the window, and she saw something she hadn't seen in what felt like forever, the familiar twinkling lights of the galaxy. The Starbound had returned. The control center erupted in cheers as the engineers confirmed that the ship had made it back. Ellie had done it. She had crossed an unknown frontier, ventured beyond the edges of the galaxy, and somehow, miraculously, found her way home. Vela's eyes widened as she watched the readouts. The Starbound had reappeared in the galaxy, and all the systems were intact. Ellie was safe. But even as the cheers filled the room, Vela couldn't help but feel a sense of awe. What Ellie had done was no small feat. The ship wasn't just fast, it was something more. It had bent space and time, altered the universe, and returned. It was something humanity had never imagined possible, and it had all started with a young girl and her dream of building the fastest ship in the galaxy. Ellie's voice came through on the communication screen, calm but filled with wonder. "I made it back," she said. I'm back." Vela smiled, her eyes sparkling with pride. "You did it, Ellie. You've done something no one else could." Ellie smiled softly, staring out the window at the stars. "I didn't do it alone. The Starbound did it. It's more than just a ship. It's something alive." Yuxel stood at Vela's side, still in disbelief. "I've seen a lot in my time, but this is something else. We'll need to understand it, all of it. But for now, let's just be glad Ellie's safe." As the Starbound returned to the known galaxy, the engineers gathered around the screens, trying to process the incredible journey they had just witnessed. But one thing was certain: the galaxy had just been shown something new, something powerful. And Ellie, with her imagination and her determination, had proven that humanity was capable of things no one had ever dreamed possible. The stars outside the control center were bright again, and the future was wide open.